Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's Meet the Author with the fabulous Myra Jolivet. Before I introduce Debra H. Goldstein, I wanted to remind everyone about our monthly meeting on March 22nd. It's normally the third Saturday of the month that we have our monthly meeting, but because so many of us will be at Left Coast Crime, we moved it to March 22nd. And that's with bestselling author Karen Dion, and she will be talking about the 6 things I learned from writing my breakout novel. Okay, somebody's laughing. Is that?
No, Andrea is laughing. That's just great. I read her first one, and I understand she's got a great sense of humor.
Oh, okay. So register at capitalcrimes.org. I'm excited to introduce Debra H. Goldstein. Debra's writing journey is as colorful as her plots. After college graduation, a job in publishing, an appearance on the game show Jeopardy, law school, then to the bench, the judicial bench, Judge Debra Goldstein was a litigator for the Department of Labor and an administrative judge. Her novels and short stories have been named Agatha, Anthony, Derringer, and Claymore finalists and won Silver Falchion, IPPY, and the Alabama Writers Conference and Bethlehem Writers Roundtable Awards. Debra serves on the National Board of Sisters in Crime and is a former president of Sync's Guppy chapter. She is a former Mystery Writers of America board member and was president of the Southeast Regional Chapter of MWA. Her latest, With Our Bellies Full and the Fire Dying, is a collection of stories that range from cozy to dark and scary. She is also the author of Kensington's Sarah Blair mystery series and 2 standalone novels, Maize in Blue and Should Have Played Poker, a Carrie Martin and the Mah Jongg Players Mystery. Welcome, Debra, and thank you, Myra, for interviewing her. Take it away.
All right. Well, we had a wonderful visit before this, and I know you guys are going to enjoy listening to everything Debra has to share because she is a hoot. You know, I like to show the cover, and I tell you what, she had me at Tales of Sinning and Redemption because I could totally relate to both of those things. And so tell us, first of all, though, was becoming a judge like your master plan? Were you a little girl walking around with a robe on and things? And I mean, did you want to become a judge? Did you set out to do that? Did you set out to be a mystery writer? Tell us where these came from.
Okay, back in the days that you're thinking of, I probably wanted to be a doctor, but I hated chemistry, so that took care of that. Though I do have a great uncle who still believed for years that I had gone to med school. But in reality, I wanted to be a writer, but I just didn't have the confidence to do it. So finally, I kept thinking about it, and I decided, Myra, that I would get out of undergrad early, which I did. I graduated. Yes, Maize in Blue is in the Wolverines, yes. I went to Michigan for my undergrad.
Go Blue.
But I decided I would leave there in December instead of waiting to May because I figured I could go to New York because when you're 17, 18, you think you can do anything. So I left the day after I graduated, resume in my little black folder, and flew to New York, stayed with my aunt, and started interviewing because I was looking for a publishing job. Just in case things didn't work out, I typed law school applications for the following fall at night. Anyway, my 2 goals, as I told you, were I wanted to get on Jeopardy and I wanted a job in publishing. And I got very lucky. I got both of my goals answered very quickly. So one thing I realized by April was that in publishing, when you're at the bottom, you don't make much money. And it takes a long time to move up the editorial chain. So I decided, law school, here I come. And I did in the fall. And as to becoming a judge, no, that wasn't in my game plan. A case of first impression and a few other things led me to that career. And then the mystery writer, we've talked about the fact that I love whodunits. I used to fly back and forth across the country for business, and I would stick, this is before the Kindle and everything, I would stick books in my bag to read. And I could read two cozy mysteries easily in the flight time. Whereas I didn't like the thrillers and things as much because cozies are fun. I could relax. And that was the whole purpose of these books, was fun and relaxation for me. Um, so that's where that came from. And then the judgeship kind of fell into my lap as time went on.
Well, and you know, your collection is fun. I mean, these 18 stories, and we'll talk about them later, they're absolutely fun to read. So, but you got to tell us where you got the nickname, that damn lady lawyer. So where did that come from?
Well, that actually is what also is the impetus for my judgeship. When I started out doing international tax for General Motors when I graduated from law school. It was really good, except I'd gone to school at Emory in the South, and my first choice didn't take me, so I got on a plane and went to all the law schools that were offering me money. And as I came through the air in Atlanta, it was gorgeous. I could see the red clay, as an English major, I could see that red clay Margaret Mitchell had talked about. And I said, oh, wow, this is gorgeous. If I do 3 years here in this warm weather, and I've never been in the South, it'll be fun. As long as I do well, I'll get a good job. Well, anyway, bottom line, it was the day after one of those hurricane tornado type things, so everything was clean and beautiful. But when I changed to I decided I wanted to work for people, and that's when I changed to the Department of Labor with the idea of cleansing myself for 2 years so I could get a job with a big firm. Well, one of the very first cases that I was involved in is a case of equal pay for women in higher education. The test case was going on in the United States at that time in Memphis. One of the guys in my office had filed it and he immediately had a heart attack. So this 25-year-old inherits the case. I then have to go down to Plains, Georgia. Carter is president. Life magazine has just run the big article on Billy Carter's daughter who had her wedding. I go to the only hotel that doesn't change the sheets twice in that area, and I check in. In those days, I had a room in the back. I will always remember this, room 216. I go to my room, and the first thing in the morning, the investigator I'm going to be working with comes to my room. But before he comes, he has to stop at the desk, and they have to call me and announce him. So they go, Miss Green, which was my maiden name, there's a gentleman here to see you. Send him up. That day I was interviewing men. I needed about an hour, so I scheduled them every hour and a half. So every hour and a half it was, Miss Green, there's a gentleman here to see you. Send him up. Okay, this goes on all day. Nobody sees me because I go out and grab something at a fast food joint because I have a Camaro that has been rented and I'm going to drive this thing because I'm 25. I like these, a sports car. I proceed the next morning, I'm going to be interviewing women. I need more time with them, so I scheduled them every 2 hours. So every 2 hours, Miss Green, there's a woman here to see you. Send her up. This proceeds to about 4:45. At that point, I'm going to do some signing for guys in my office. I had some, documents to execute. So I had a gentleman coming at about 5:30 and one coming at 7. But I decided I'd go down and get a cup of coffee and a piece of pie in the dining room. I walk down and I stop at the desk, which, Billy's daughter is one of the desk clerk. I said, I'm Miss Green from 216. I'm going to be in the dining room having a cup of coffee and some pie. But if a gentleman calls for me, please let me know he's here. And now I wanted to look older, so I had a dress on that was very nice and had a slit on the side. You can imagine what I looked like. I was also a lot thinner and younger then. So I walk into the dining room, finish my coffee, come back out, and I'm going to get a magazine because after I finish with these guys, I'm not leaving till morning. And because the room was so cheap, I had never taken a government rate. There was none. So anyway, all of a sudden I see the two desk clerks hitting each other. And I'm looking over my shoulder and I hear, that's the one, that's the one. It wasn't until later that night when they introduced one of the men that they found out I was the lawyer from the government. And for the next year, while the case was proceeding, I became that damn lady lawyer. And we won the case. Memphis lost.
All right.
And to this day, that is still good law, and it's a case of first impression.
That's awesome. Now, forgive me if you've been asked this like 2,000 times, but so you chose mysteries over legal dramas. Why? What's that? Why is that?
For several reasons. I didn't feel when I started writing that I was comfortable writing anything legal because I didn't want anybody to say, hey, that's my case, that's me, or anything, because by then I was a federal administrative law judge, and we were the best kept secret. Once you were appointed, you had a lifetime appointment. And I liked mysteries. That's what I read. So I wanted to enjoy the whodunits, and I wanted to share with the public what I enjoyed, which was that kind of a book. So that's where I went with it, Myra. But
That's well, and I get that. I'm sure everybody around on the Zoom has some of their personal something, either job experience, personal life, whatever that's infused in the stories. And I'm assuming when I read yours, there's stuff from your life that's in those stories. Is that correct?
very much so. If you take some of the short stories, for example, in Legal Magic, there's a scene where there's a young lawyer and the young lawyer is talking and making a presentation, but you can't see the judge. He can't see the judge because the judge is lying down behind the bench because the judge is having back surgery the next week, but didn't want the docket to get out of whack. So you ever try presenting an argument to what amounts to a dead judge? Then the other thing is, like, the first two books we talked about, the standalones, each one, the first one, Maize and Blue, drew on some of my experience at the University of Michigan. Some of the Should Have Played Poker drew on the fact that I played Mahjong, and it has a young corporate attorney, which I had been a GM, and I stole some of that. But then both of those books got orphaned, which means the publisher either went out of business or stopped doing mysteries. But it took years to get my rights back because the books were selling. But I wanted to write another cozy. And I figured, okay, let me see. Small world, small environment. I can do a small southern town. Amateur sleuth, I can do an amateur sleuth. And all the other tropes, I could do those. I could throw in a cat. I could do whatever I needed, except there was a problem. I don't like crafts. I don't like cooking. And this was going to be a problem because if you ever noticed, most of the cozies have those in them. So I said, oh crap, I guess I can't write a cozy. And then it dawned on me, and I asked all of you, are there any of you out there who don't like to cook or don't like crafts? That's how Sarah Blair in One Taste Too Many came to be. And this is the Kensington series. There's 5 books in this. And Sarah was married at 18, divorced by 28, and I had a long marriage, so that's not true. But the lack of cooking and being more frightened of the kitchen than of murder, that's me. And the other thing I stole a number of things from, for this series from my life. But at one of my wedding showers, I opened a box and there were these gorgeous paper plates and napkins. And somebody behind me quipped, oh, look, she got her good china. So, these books, and I'm going to make a plug. If you haven't read this series and you want to, Kensington always runs the first book in the ebook as a loss leader at $1.89. So that is
That's fantastic. Well, you killed me with the judge because I've spent a lot of time in courtrooms, and I just figured that you just made that up because the visual in my head of the judge laid out on a cot or whatever behind the bench is just rich. It's just delicious. So, so do you like the shorts better than long form, or is it just you like both, or
I really like both. I started writing the shorts kind of for a contest. Alabama Writers Conclave, one of my friends dragged me there. She says, if you're going to write, come to this. And it had a very good education thing, but it also had contests. And I said, oh, I like contests. If you haven't figured out, I'm competitive. So I started entering them the next year. And I've entered all these things, a short story and some other things, thinking I'm going to win. I'm going to wrap it up. The only thing I won was nonfiction for an essay. Maybe I should hug you, which is what happens when women start getting a little older and we start either becoming our friends or some of our friends get sick. Very short essay, but maybe I should hug you. But back to the question, I then entered the following year a short story that won, Legal Magic, the one we've talked about.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then by that point, I was seeing opportunities to submit short stories. And even when I was writing long, a short story I could write very quickly and enjoy. And so if I couldn't get something to work in the book, I could do a short story. And so I ended up writing both. And to this day, I say I like them equally. And when my life got complicated in the last year or two, there's not been a new book, but in 25, 26, you're going to see at least 10 short stories that as of today have been purchased or agreed to.
Well, it's so enjoyable, and it's like, and we'll talk about that later about that your process and all of that. But I mean, everything is in there, all the arcs, all the this, all of that. It's not the diet plate. I mean, everything is loaded in these stories, and so that is fabulous. But so let's talk about a couple of them, and you let me pick them, so I was thrilled about that. Okay, Thanksgiving in moderation. Well, before that, would you like to read us one of your favorite paragraphs?
I'd be glad to.
Okay,
And I'm
cool.
going to read it from Thanksgiving in Moderation, which is, I think, one of your favorite stories. And let me tell you something about this book. I write, I like to write light humor and cozier books, but I write both cozy and dark in my short stories. So this collection, which is 18 of my stories that deal with friends and families, their sins and their sometimes redemption, has both dark stories, nothing that would require a danger warning or something like that, but and then it has humorous or more cozy stories. And this particular one, Thanksgiving in Moderation, just going to read you the opening. Thanksgiving always has been a good time for weddings, especially second or third, or in this case, a fifth time around. Alicia, my sister, gladly ticked off the benefits of a Thanksgiving wedding on her fingers each time for my mother and me. One, the entire family already is together, so I won't get stuck buying extra plane tickets for my fiancés or my own kids. Two, nobody can complain about what I serve because the turkey dressing, greens, yams, and pumpkin pie menu is set. Plus, I save money because everybody brings a dish. Three, my husband never has an excuse to forget our anniversary because no matter what the actual date of our wedding is, we'll always celebrate it on Thanksgiving Day. Somewhere between numbers 2 and 3, our now 85-year-old mother, who often lacks a filter, suggested Alicia would be better sleeping with the men she dates rather than marrying them.
It just grabbed me. The mother with no filter, the crazy people around the table. I was like, wow, I'm at home. It just totally worked. And so where did that come from? Where did that crazy family come from? And I'll just want to tease that somebody dies at the dinner table, and I'll leave it at that. But so where did they come from?
Well, it came from a few things. It came from family. It came from one of the family members, an extended family member, kept getting married. And this young woman, every time she got married, because she came from a fairly affluent family, they'd put in a gigolo clause. And for those of you who don't know what a gigolo clause is in the prenup, the gigolo clause says if the guy and she stay married so long, he'd get X dollars. Well, all of her husbands kept divorcing her the day after. And you can see something of this if you look at Tom Cruise's weddings and things where they, if you stay for 10 years, you're not going to get anything. So they all leave just before or just, anyway. And the other thing was the mother of this daughter kept marrying too, because she was an older woman, but she believed that if she was having relations with somebody, she should marry them. So she is now, quite elderly, but she's been through 4 husbands. She's outlived them all. So I stole from that part of the family. And then there is nobody who I'm sure is watching tonight that hasn't been at a crazy family dinner. And so that was easy to steal and that you could identify with.
And I don't know what, I just love when the guest dies at dinner. I don't know. That's for me, that's just a win. So now the other was the political cornucopia,
Mhm.
vote buying, you know, that crazy kind of small town. Sometimes I hate to put it all on small towns, but sometimes small town elections can be a little too folksy. So where did that come from with that one?
Okay, I was actually on the bench by that point. I had an expert witness and we were talking about elections. And there'd been a thing in the newspaper about the history of certain elections in Alabama and vote buying. And I made some comment, and this guy looked at me, and his father-in-law had been a big wig in one of the parties, and I won't go into which one, but he said, vote buying existed. And he said, he started explaining. I said, how did it work? And he says, very simple. You'd have to be so many feet from the polling place, but you would park your car and open your trunk. People would come up and there'd be a dollar amount that everybody sort of had agreed on. So if you were going to vote, you'd go to whichever car, you'd get your, you'd agree to go vote. And then they'd send somebody in. And this person who was telling me this said, and when I was a kid, a teenager, I was one of the ones who got sent in. You stay with them till they pull the lever. Once they vote for the right person, they get their money. And so I looked at him and I said, are you telling me the truth? And he said, yes, ma'am. And I said, oh, I have to put this in a story.
And the three candidates, so she has an incumbent and then two opponents, and they decide to have a Thanksgiving community event. Now, I didn't realize that the first Thanksgiving served lobster. I looked it up. Now, there was one place on AI that it actually said seafood was served, but all the other places basically were the predictable menus of fowl and venison and, you know, and potatoes and things like that. So that one is really interesting. And obviously there's death. And so that's a good one to pull. Legal magic really tugged at my heart. You know, when a woman uh, feels strongly that a guy that she recognizes was at Dachau, and he has changed his name and he's kind of under the radar in the community. Tell us about that one and how that came about.
Okay, in that particular story, the woman in question is a Holocaust survivor, as you're describing, and he keys his car. And of course, he gets her for malicious mischief, and is going to prosecute her. And you have a young lawyer who, you know how some young lawyers just never quite make it in the firm? So instead of being up here, they're assigned to something like being in charge of the collection department or some random thing because they have a relative in the firm. Okay, well, that's kind of how he is. The young lawyer is not too good, but his mother, who's one of the four Mah Jongg players, which is in the story. I used Mah Jongg players for the first time. Later, I used them as comic relief in the book. Um, his mother says, you've got to represent her. Well, he's not a really great lawyer, but he figures this out. And that's where the story goes. He's representing her and he's figuring out his way. Where the background of the story came from is my mom was a Holocaust survivor. So I find the history and all of this interesting. And so I decided to mix the two. I have included this in some of my other stories, the Holocaust and things of that nature. And I have one that I'm particularly proud of that'll be coming out next year that I'm really excited. It's one of my better ones. But in the meantime, that's the background. I stole from what I knew from Holocaust survivors and from stories I'd heard and from
Right.
going over and visiting the camps, but I don't use that. That's just the background. The
Right.
humor is the Mah Jongg players, and if this guy can figure out how to get out of the hole he's in of having to defend her,
That's
because
right.
he's got a very smart lawyer. And I will tell you one other little joke. This was the first story I ever got published. It's the one that won an award from AWC. Well, I thought I was being so smart. If you look through that story, we often talk about Easter eggs in stories or leaving little clues. I used everybody in my family's name. My,
Ah,
my daughter Jennifer, my sister, everybody. Okay, story comes out. I'm so proud of it. It's won, it's published. My sister calls me and she goes, you know, it would be a nice thing if you didn't bring the family into it.
Oops. Oops. Oh, well, can't please everybody.
Still supports me, yeah, but I have never used her name again.
Wow. Well, and I love stories where you're rooting for the person who's kind of guilty, but you get it. You understand why. And so, a lot of in your collection, there's a lot of that where we care about the person who's quote unquote guilty. There's some of that, and that was part of a good ride as well.
Well, that's
So
where your redemption come in.
that exactly that redemption, it just rings true, and I enjoyed it a lot. So this is the time where I like to ask words of wisdom, where we dig into your experiences a little further. So what are some lessons learned along your writing journey that you would share or highlight that we can hear about?
Well, everybody will tell you the first lesson that I had to learn, which if you're going to write, stop talking about it and do it. One of my friends, I kept talking about it for years, but I really wasn't doing it. And one of my friends, and I had the idea for Maize and Blue. And my friend said, leave Joel, leave the 4 kids, leave the dog, come down to the beach. I have a condo. I won't bother you for the weekend except to eat out for dinner. But what I want you to do is write. And if you don't write, with this perfect environment, I never want to hear you mention books again. Well, I wrote 85 legal pages that weekend, and 5 of them actually ended up in Maize and Blue. So
Wow.
that's the first thing. You got to do it. But you can't just do it from the top of your head. The next thing I would advise is take every craft class you can. Read books, read other authors, but read about craft and take the classes because there's so much to learn in writing, both about the craft and about the business side. You have to know both if you're going to be a successful author because they're going to kick you in the pants. Your writing goes up and down emotionally. And that's the third thing. Be ready emotionally. This is not the easiest ride, and don't expect to be a millionaire overnight. Now, maybe it takes 2 nights, but yeah. But anyway, but and enjoy the ride. I feel like I'm in my second childhood doing this, Myra. I'm having so much fun with writing. You know,
Wonderful.
so those are my things. Take craft and learn. Oh,
Mhm.
and
So,
network.
oh,
I'm sorry. Networking is extremely important. If you don't network with other people, that's where you learn. And when things do kick you in the pants, those are like when my books were orphaned, I didn't know what to do. Those were people who I didn't even know stepped in and gave me advice.
that's where Sisters in Crime really comes in, right?
I
Sync
joined
is just
Crime
sync
and Me.
is
Have you
amazing.
read?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what's your process? Planner, pants, both, kind of what's your process for each form? Same
I
process, short and long, or what? What's
It's a little different in that I'm a pantser. True nature, I get an idea, but until I hear the first sentence or a character speaking, I don't know what voice I'm going to use. I don't know where the story is going to go. Once I have that opening, and I may end up polishing that opening, but once I have that line,
Mhm.
it's like the whole thing unveils itself to me. Now I pants, and most of my books were written that way originally until I got to Kensington. There, my editor insisted on having a synopsis, and well, the problem is I wrote the synopsis that he wanted, which means I had a plan. So, and that's not as flexible, not as fluid. So what he discovered every time there's a book, I'd kind of stick to that. But then I'd be sending him an email. I just discovered there was another character in the kitchen. She's sitting on the floor. I hope you don't mind. And of course, he allowed it. But,
Yeah.
so I had different relationships show up. I hate to tell you this, but so and so and so and so have gotten together, and I had no idea they were going to before I wrote the book, that kind of thing.
Great. That's great.
Um, so
So you're not creating a big outline chart unless you absolutely have to do a synopsis or something.
unless I have to, otherwise I write down a few words to make
Mhm.
sure I go in the right direction. And
Mhm.
sometimes it doesn't work. I was sure with One Taste Too Many exactly who I was going to have be the murderer. And that book ran, I wrote it so fast in the beginning, got to the halfway mark, and then I kept writing and something happened. My mom died and I stopped for a little while and I then picked it up again, wrote it to the end, and I said, this book stinks. There's something seriously wrong with it. And I thought about it and I realized, you idiot, you've pushed them into the wrong murderer. And I
Mm.
threw out half a book, started at the point that I liked, wrote to the end, and that book became a Woman's World pick of the week. Um, that one, once I got it and realized who the right murderer was, I even realized the clues were in the first half of the book. I just kind of had missed them, even though I wrote them.
That's wild. Uh, well, we appreciate your service on the board of sync. And how has Sisters in Crime enhanced your writing journey?
Sisters in Crime for me has been a wonderful journey because I met so many people. I I joined the Guppies, and that's where I got a lot of my craft. That's where I got a lot of emotional support. I was on the national board for 5 years as the monitoring chair, and that's where I got a lot of the understanding of kind of like my equal pay case of the importance of woman and parity. And because when I was on that board, you could see where it was still not equal. And then it got a little better each year. Um, then I rolled off. And as I said, I was president of Guppies and I was also active with MWA and other things. Um, I made such good friends, and that's 80% of it. And I've joined different chapters because I get something out of every chapter in both terms of the people I meet and the lectures and the things. I'm already signed up for Karen's class and on the 22nd. Um, but that was all important to me. And then 2 years ago, I was asked to come back on the board nationally. And I came back on as a co-chapter liaison for last year. And this year I'm the MAL. And to my chagrin, I rewrote the bylaws. So
Mhm.
now I'm having to answer the questions on all the bylaws.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic. And, we thank you, for giving your time like that. And right now we want to open up for questions and discussion. So can we do that, guys? Can we open it up now? Open up the floor, as they
Let
say.
me also put in a plug. Myra's doing such good work on the DEIJB and other committees and things.
Oh,
So
yeah,
Thank
I'm
you. Thank you so much.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Here's a couple of questions. Well, I actually have one right now, and this is from Dover. And has cramming for the bar, law school exam prep, and writing court briefs and opinions helped you in your writing editing process?
That's a good question.
no, it actually hurt me. Cramming for the bar had nothing to do with anything. I am not I've taken a number of bars over the years because only certain ones had reciprocity. When you write a brief or a decision, it's a very tight type of writing and it's boring.
Mm.
One of the reasons I think I made my judgeship is it's a merit appointment and you had to do things. And one of the things I had to do was turn in a brief. And I turned in one of the few comical ones I ever wrote because, well, it was a guy who said that he was a certain type of Indian. And he said he took his girlfriend on a house hunting trip instead of his wife. And he said that wherever you move the blanket, that was marriage. And then he compared it to some other things. So I went to the Indian rolls and proved that he wasn't on them. I went to a rabbi and got a statement to show that a get was not get out, and you're divorced. And I also showed that the Indian tribe that he was claiming to be so enamored of and a part of was the only Roman Catholic Indian tribe in the United States. Piscataway Indians. So, and there's only 2 books written on it, but I found both of them. So
Oh my
I
God.
had to learn to
There's,
rewrite.
There's so much weird in that story. You got to give us a minute. There's so much crazy in that story. I just love it. But go ahead.
But anyway, to be a writer, I had to learn to throw out the seriousness and the structure of decision-making writing and get into what people would enjoy a lot more. And every now and then somebody will tell me, like when they're reading as a beta reader, you sound like a lawyer. It's too boring. Or you're using words you shouldn't use. So I'm learning.
Well, another one from Dover about on the same subject. As a judge, you ever gotten any of the fun briefs like the Admiralty case that was written in iambic pentameter? Anything like?
I haven't written that, but this particular brief was funny because we had a 14-hour trial in this case. And what it was is it's an MSPB case, and I was part of the Department of Labor, and my job was to get this guy fired because he had taken money and lied, and he had a security clearance. So he had done something that he shouldn't have. And so I was having so much fun when I wrote the brief because I wrote it not funny, but I wrote it so that it would build upon itself, and I would call upon, use the thing like I had the paragraph pointing out that while he argued that a get was get out, the rabbi indicated, no, it's a certain communal trial. And then I did the thing with the blanket, and I had so much fun writing 2 paragraphs on the blanket, moving around and whether it was marriage or not marriage. And years later, somebody came up to me and we were talking, and he goes, You're the one that wrote that brief on the Indian. And I go, yeah, because it was kind of memorable because most of the time they get very dry things on the writing samples.
That's wild.
Let's see.
And yes, you say that I didn't have confidence. Yeah, I had confidence to do a lot of things when I tried out for Jeopardy. That was even a funny thing. When I got my first publishing job, I turned down one because I didn't like the hours. But I went through the testing process, and I had confidence galore when I was 17 or 18. It kind of dwindles as you get older. You know too much.
Question here, do you have any tips on coming up with subplots?
Not really, in the sense that when you're thinking of a story, at least in my mind, you get an opening concept. For example, there is a story in the collection, Violet Eyes, and it begins with talking about sometimes marriages get stale. It's worse when they start that way. And so you immediately know that something's wrong in the marriage, but you don't know what, and you don't know the twist. And so the story is only a few pages long, but it ends up having a plot and a subplot. The beauty of a short story, when I write a novel, you have, whatever the main plot's going to be, and you want to have a lot more subplots. In a short story, you have to hit the same beats or the same high and low points, but you got to do it faster and you got to do it tighter. But you do want to have a subplot or a twist because like when you look at something like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, which is one of my favorite stories, you're reading it and you're seeing one plot going this way, and then all of a sudden you get to the end and you realize, there was a whole different story going on there.
Wow.
So. Another question?
A question about, do you write daily, or do you have a word count that you try to attain every day?
No, I am with when the muse strikes. I do really well if I have a deadline, and that helps me get in the gear. I have a different setup. If I have a short story that's due, I will write it in time, and I like to get things in a little early. On a novel, when I write in between, like when I was writing the Kensington series, I would have a date that I had to have it turned in by. I would turn in the book, and then I would take off 2 months because I would give myself, the contracts called for them to be written 11 months apart. I would take off 2 months to be a reader, because as a writer, you read differently than you did as a reader. You start tearing things apart in your head. But if you just stop, forget about writing for a few weeks, and just read a lot of books, you get back to that fun thing of reading. And so I still do that. And then I go and start writing. And if I don't feel like it, I don't do it. If I feel like it, I do it. Like, I've been really writing a lot lately, but I never worry about the word count. I do some sprinting with one person, which I never did until just a few months ago. And we do look at the word count on that day, because if we get a few words in, we're excited. But no, for me, if I had to write every day and say I have to get 1,000 words, a lot of them would be so crappy that I would have to throw them out.
A couple more just came in, which is great. Keep them coming, folks. Do you play with perspective like in the lottery? In other words, like a camera view in a movie, start with a tight shot and open it wider as the story unveils?
Sometimes, and sometimes it goes the other way. I start with an opening that is more general, and I come down and narrow it in. For example, the story that With Our Bellies Full and the Fire Dying comes from is one of the darker stories. It deals with an undercover cop, and in the beginning, and it's set in a tent city, so everybody is homeless, tent city type environment. So you get the overall picture. There's a murder, and you know that this undercover cop, he doesn't want to get found, but he's trying to figure it out. And so the story keeps coming in like this as you begin to know the other characters better. And it is only as you get to the end that it very narrowly focuses, and you realize the difference. And With Our Bellies Full and the Fire Dying referred to the fact that, when they were around the garbage can making a stew type, of thing, and everybody is throwing in a can of food and everything, because when they could go to bed, they could relax. And even though the situation was not good, once their bellies were full and the fire started dying, they could find a place in the tent to sleep, or in that area next to the bridge or whatever. So I took the perspective from the community, which was the mayor's perspective and things, and that's only a paragraph, but you get the wider perspective, and then you narrow down to the end of the story.
A question about that same stuff. Have you thought about using that blanket brief in a novel?
I think I could. You have to understand, one of the questions Myra asked me in the very beginning about why I didn't do legal. One of the things, as I said, was I didn't want anybody to identify anything. I've been out of the judgeship now. I walked away to follow my passion. And if I can tell a very quick story of why I walked away. If you can imagine me in a black robe, like a black shirt, and sitting above you a few inches on a bench, and I'm listening to the thing, and I've been on the bench 23 years at that point. I had every lawyer trained. Now, because of that brief and because of that case of first impression, the average age for my judgeship was 58, and I was 36 when I got it. So you can do the math. I was just approaching average age. Okay, I'm sitting on that bench, and I have all the lawyers trained. At the end of a hearing, I would go, "Is there anything further?" The lawyer was trained to say, "No, Your Honor," and I would do a standard closing. But on that day, I had an excellent lawyer in front of me. It's somebody I had litigated against when I was still in my litigation days. And he went, "No, Your Honor." But his client said, "Yes, there's one more thing." And I looked to the lawyer, and here's this excellent lawyer, and he goes, which means he can't control the client, which, doesn't happen very often that you see somebody go. So I look to the client and I go, "Yes, sir, what is it?" And he goes, "Your Honor," and excuse me, Amazing Blue had come out, and I kept the two jobs separate at that point. And he goes, "Your Honor, I just want you to know, no matter how you rule, I'm gonna buy your book."
Oh.
I'm sure he didn't buy my book because I ruled against him. I went home that night and I said to my husband, Joe, we just got the last kid out of law school, and she got her law school and her MBA. Getting married in the fall. She's off the dole. Um, Nobody else of the kids are going to go back to school at this point. I think I'd like to run the numbers because if this works, I've been doing this and I want to follow my passion. And that night we ran the numbers and I walked in the next morning, and you have to understand that both as a litigator for DOL and as a judge, there weren't very many females. I mean, when I got put on the bench, there were 13 females out of 1,000 some doing my job. And we doubled it that year, but not much more thereafter until more recently. But I walked in the next morning and I said, okay, guys, I want you to know I'm taking no more cases. I'm going to stay long enough to work out my docket, which I predict is 6 to 8 months. None of you is going to get stuck with my work, but I am taking nothing new. They all sure thought I was dying. I had breast cancer, whatever. Everybody had an idea. And I kept saying, no, I'm fine. If I can stay healthy for 20 years more, I can have a whole nother career that I like. And so I'm in my second childhood.
That's
great.
awesome.
And then
So
I guess one other comment, I couldn't write about legal, and I'm just getting to a point that I can write about it. I went to a panel one time and Elaine Viets was there and she said she couldn't write about her stroke for almost 8 to 10 years. And Alexia Gordon said, who's a doctor, said she couldn't write anything medical for about 8 years. So I think it takes time, and some of you may be in the same boat.
Well, one last thing, and if somebody has a question, go ahead and put it there for Rick. But I wanted to ask you before we close, do you have a favorite writing spot? I did a webinar once. We all had to take a picture of where we write. I was pretty embarrassed. We had to show, because my desk looked like craziness, and everybody was to post, where you write. So I just thought of that. So where do you write?
Okay, in my first house, I wrote in an upstairs room that I had made into an office where I had 2 windows and I could look out over the neighborhood. And it was a very quiet area. And that was when I still didn't use a laptop, I was using my on the desk type thing. Then I got my first laptops, and then I started, and we downsized that year. And when we downsized, right after, as I was writing, I started writing wherever I could in the house. I'd write, this book was written in one chair. This book was written partially in the living room. The main thing was I like to have Broadway music playing in the back. And so I would write, each book is written to a different show. Now we downsized again about 4.5 years ago. And my dad had died somewhere in between all this. And my mom, for their first anniversary, had a special chair made for him. It is longer because he had very long legs, so it's a deep chair. And as a kid, we used to, I'm looking at it because it's next to me, we used to play on it. We made it we made tents on it. We made covered wagons on it. We thought the arms were so big we could ride it. I mean, that was the chair. So the only thing I ever wanted out of the house when my mom passed away was I wanted that chair. So I took the chair, I had it moved from California, which is where she was at that time, to Birmingham, and that is where I write, in that chair.
Wow, that's awesome. That really is. Rick, are there any more questions before we?
There's 2. I've got one. Where in Michigan were you raised?
I started in New Jersey,
Yeah.
and then we moved to Michigan when I was 12. And I was living in Jackson, Michigan, and then went to college in Ann Arbor. And Rick, where were you from in Michigan? Since obviously
Flint.
Flint.
There you go. Doesn't that explain everything?
I went to some youth group things there. They had a camp up there. Yeah.
Favorite Broadway musicals?
One of my very favorite ones. I like 1776. I saw it the week it opened in New York with William Daniel and the week it closed in New York. Come From Away is another one of my favorites. And those are two of my number one favorites. I like any Broadway show. When I was a kid, when we moved to Michigan, my grandparents were still in New Jersey, and my dad still had to go into New York so many times a year. So we would go, my kid sister and I would be taken back. But the deal was we could see a Broadway show every night if we were good with our grandparents. So we would spend the week seeing shows, and you could see two on, when it was matinee. So for a number of years there's not a show I missed. Of course,
That's
now
awesome.
that I'm older, I don't get in as often to New York.
And matinee day is Wednesdays, right? I thought it was Wednesdays.
It was Wednesday and Saturday.
Ah, that's right. That's right.
And so I have learned, even from here, when I go, every now and then I'll go into New York for a quick weekend. But if you do it right and you do the airplanes right, you can actually fly in, catch a Friday night show, see two on Saturday and one on Sunday, because some of them have matinees, and then take the last flight out.
Nice.
Love it.
Well, if there are no more questions, and I think we're almost out of time anyway, does anybody have anything before we say goodnight? But I just, I know Karen's going to thank you as well, but thank you so much. It has been such a joy speaking with you and having this visit with everyone else. It really has. Thank you so much. And I
I've
enjoy
enjoyed
your
it very much with you too. Thank you for everything, Myra, and the work you put in to make the interview good.
Yeah, Myra, you're the best. And Deborah, thank you for spending your birthday with us.
My pleasure.
Totally.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.